Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Any signs of life?
Negative.
Have you tried all hailing frequencies?
Affirmative. No answer from the cube.
Have the department heads meet me on the bridge.
Already standing by.
Life sciences.
Same report.
So are we gonna just let it hold us here? We've got phaser weapons. I vote we blast it.
I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Bailey. When this becomes a democracy.
You realize that the aim will, of course, be very crude.
I don't care if you hit the broadside of a barn. Just hurry, please.
Captain, why should I aim at such a structure?
Mind, Spock. Just get on with the job.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Greetings and welcome out to ThisWeekInGeek.net's Future Imperfect. I am one of your survivors on today's episode of Future Imperfect, but I'm not alone as I wander this post-apocalyptic wasteland. I'm joined by my guide to surviving this disaster.
Well, I'm Aaron Pollyea.
So yes, guys, we are back here, and as you may have noticed, I am back on Future Imperfect as Alex is still taking some time away on vacation. He's playing lots of video games. I'm hopefully going to hang out with him really soon, and typically whenever Alex goes away, I am allowed to program pretty much whatever I want, and I decided with Future Imperfect, we like to steer away sometimes from some of the more established sci-fi franchises like your Star Wars, your Star Treks, your Stargates, whatever. And I pitched this idea to Aaron, and we've been kind of refining it over the last week or so. And he suggested to me some movies. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about post-apocalyptic movies. And you might be thinking, oh, great, they're going to talk about The Terminator. They're going to talk about Mad Max, you know. But we're not.
No.
And Aaron picked these movies, and I'm really glad that he did, because these are three movies I've never seen before. But Jesus Christ, two of these movies will demand you need a hug almost immediately afterwards.
And yes, before we go in, yes, I will talk about that one of these movies can actually scar you emotionally for quite a while. Go into these, at least two of these movies with a little bit of care.
Yeah, so these movies, you can find one of them pretty easily on YouTube. I think one of them is on Tubi. You can buy it commercially as well, but there are several different versions of the Blu-ray. One of them has special features, one of them does not. So the movies we're going to be talking about today, we're going to start off with the 1984 BBC film called Threads. We're also going to be talking about the 1974 movie called Stalker.
And then 1979.
1979. And we're also going to talk about the very famous movie Logan's Run. And so when Aaron pitched these movies to me, when he mentioned Threads to me, he said, Mike, this is a movie that is frankly going to mess you up. You may wish to have someone to talk to after seeing it. So me being, I'm flippant. I'm like, yeah, sure. I've seen everything. I've seen stuff from Live Leak. Ain't nothing going to fuck me up. Man, kind of wrong when I went in with like that attitude. So to kind of paint a picture for you. So in the early 1980s, there was obviously a lot of heightened nuclear tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States, basically the West and NATO. And you could argue that's still very much happening now, especially with the war in Ukraine. So this is rather timely. And there was an ABC television movie called The Day After, which is another movie we may talk about at some point down the road. And it told the story of what happened to America in a post-nuclear apocalyptic wasteland. And you might be thinking, oh, we've seen that. I mean, we've all seen Mad Max, or we've all played Fallout. You know what? Maybe it won't be so bad. And everybody has this weird vision of themselves surviving the nuclear apocalypse with, bottle caps as currency. You've got your trusty shotgun and you're good to go. No, these movies were a gut punch to people, so much so that they were shown without commercial breaks. They were shown with warnings. And there was even a point, I think I read this in the Wikipedia article, they were worried about potentially mass suicides happening because it would upset the population so much. So move forward a couple of years later, and the BBC started to make a movie called Threads. And Threads starts out with a young couple. They're about to have an unplanned pregnancy in the English town of Sheffield, to which I have a friend. You may remember Skyblaze from the Nerd to the Third podcast. And I mentioned this on Twitter the other day, and they were like, oh, yeah, I'm from there. Yeah, this is messed up. So... So this movie sets this scene up, and you follow a couple of different families, and it shows an escalating tension in the Middle East, where the Russians are backing a Iran base, and the US is like, that's not going to happen. And over the course of just a little under a month, tensions escalate, things get worse. Paratroopers are dropped in. The Russians detonate a airborne nuclear-tipped weapon to destroy a bunch of B-52 bombers. The U.S. retaliates. And because this is the 1980s, there's really no cell phones. The news wires have been cut, and not a lot of information is getting out of the Middle East. So while this is happening, the UK government is quietly preparing its civil defense people, saying, okay, something's going down. You need to be ready. We need to know what food stores are like, fuel. We need to make sure what the homeless situation is like. We need all our ducks in a row should shit go south. And tensions start escalating. The UK government institutes its Emergency Powers Act. People start freaking out. They start panic buying. And eventually there is a full nuclear exchange between the NATO powers and the Soviet Union. And UK is hit with, I think, 12 million to 22 million dead in the first couple of days from fallout.
Yeah, it's very rough. And the movie's a slow, well, yeah, it is a movie. It's a slow burn from the start up until the initial nuclear exchange.
Yeah, and it really builds proper tension and dread too.
And when it happens, you don't want it to happen. It's not like in a lot of movies where you're like, okay, let's get to the disaster, let's get to the spectacle. You don't want it to happen, and as it's happening, you're sickened by it.
Yeah, like there was a point in this movie where you meet the young couple. I think their name are Jimmy and Ruth. You meet Jimmy and Ruth. Jimmy's outside with like his best friend, and you think he's going to go run and save Ruth. He doesn't survive.
No, he's just wiped out. He's gone.
Yeah, he's boom, gone. And then you start to see what happens, and because of the way nuclear blasts work, what the first blast is detonated over the North Sea, so that disrupts electronics, electricity. Basically, if it's plugged in and if it's got a current to it, it's dead. It will not work.
Yeah, it's the EMP.
So things are disrupted. So if you thought you were going anywhere in a car, you're wrong if it happened to be running. So things are bad. And because of the way the nuclear attacks start to play out, they start attacking critical infrastructure. And that means more attacks closer to home. So they start getting killed by the heat, the blast, and eventually fallout. And one of the things I didn't expect in this movie, those same civil servants that were meant to be maintaining the county of Sheffield and the city of Sheffield's civil defense, they get buried alive under City Hall. And they still have to direct emergency resources, and they can't get through to people because of the radiation is blocking radio communication. So everything is on fire. Fire and rescue crews can't get out. It's complete anarchy. And you see the young woman Ruth wandering through the streets, and you see charred bodies. One thing I didn't expect was the amount of dead animals.
Oh no, when we should go trigger alert, because there's like tons of things in here. Mike, I did not watch this movie again for this recording, and I admit that, but this movie has burned its way into my mind in ways I wish it hadn't. The dead animals thing, there's one specific thing that still haunts me, and it's the cat bursting into flames from the flash of the nuclear blast. When I'm just saying that, my throat is clenching up.
It's so visceral because you don't see it coming.
No, you don't see it coming, and it's screaming, and it's not a real cat, but the fact is that it's so fast, and your brain fills in all of the little details. Man, this movie, I can't even talk. Like I said to you, you need to have somebody to talk to after seeing this. The days after the blast, Mike, when the gore, the literal diarrhea is flowing out of the hospital down the steps of all the people melting from the radiation and dying inside. That's another one of those images that can't get out of my head. I know this movie. I've seen it once, and it's in me, and it's horrifying.
To me, the scene that sticks out the most in my mind, Ruth is walking through the ruins of Sheffield, and she passes by a body. And sometimes in movies, when you see a body that's been burned, you see its teeth. They're still relatively intact. And she passes by it, and then she passes by a woman who's holding presumably her dead child. And it flashes where she looks, and she's seen this kid before when the kid was healthy, and the mother doesn't say anything, just looks up at her. And as you were mentioning, it starts detailing 4 days after the attack, 10 days after the attack. And another thing that really stuck out in my mind is one of the civil defense workers, they're in the bunker and they're trying to coordinate kind of resources. And one of the workers is like, we have to give food to the people that are going to survive. Why would we give food to the people that are already dead? They just don't know it yet. And it's brutal math is what it comes down to in those times, because one of the things that this movie makes very clear is when shit goes south, and it will, the people in charge are just as fallible as you and me. And it's so brutal because it's going to come down to math, and it's going to be an equation you don't want to think about, because at one point in the movie they say the only viable currency, because money means nothing, is food. If you can work harder, you get more food. The sick and the weak do not get as much. And it goes on and on and on. Another scene that sticks out in my mind is just before the attack happens, they're anticipating mass casualties from the war in Iran. So they start clearing the hospitals, and you see this older couple take home their elderly mother. And she passes away at one point, and she dies in front of the door to their fallout shelter, and they cover her with a blanket. And at one point, a scene passes they start saying there's a smell, and you see rats go underneath the blanket, and obviously you can guess what they're kind of doing there. And I was just surprised by the brutality of this movie. And I also found out there was a hashtag back in 2018 where people wanted to get this movie re-released. It hasn't been shown again on British television since 2003. And I can't remember what the hashtag was. I know I talked about it on my TikTok today. And I was just like, this is something I think people need to see.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I would remake it, simply because I think spectacle would become a big part of it.
Yeah, this needs to be as understated as possible, as just brutal, brief, and cruel as it needs to be to get across the point that nuclear war isn't something funny. It isn't something that anyone wins. No one wins.
Yeah,
we all die.
Yeah, it's literally the worst case scenario you can imagine. So the movie, after about the first year after the attack, it starts talking about, well, fuel starting to run out. This will be the last crops that can be planted with harvesters. After that, it all has to be manual labor. And the food supply starts dropping. So it mentions that Britain has returned to medieval population levels. And it goes even further, where it says now it's a couple years after the attack. The sun has finally started to come out after the nuclear winter. And it even says at some points in North America, the temperature has dropped as much as 25 degrees centigrade, which is a very significant amount. And they say one of the worst things that can happen are cataracts and cancer. So you see Ruth, who has survived this long, who now has a daughter, her eyes are completely shot, and she passes away. Her daughter doesn't feel anything, because this is a world where emotion and attachment really don't mean a whole hell of a lot.
Life and death are so meaningless.
Yeah, like they become so interchangeable. And there's even a point, I didn't expect this. At one point, Ruth and these other kids steal some food or steal some supplies off somebody. One of the kids gets shot right in the back.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit. Didn't see that one.
It's Jane, though. It's the daughter's name is Jane.
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry. So, yeah. So it's one of those things where it paints a picture of the post-apocalyptic world where you don't have Mel Gibson walking through with the swagger of Rockatansky, or whatever the fuck his name is.
Yeah, that's right.
You don't have, like this people scavenging technology that's been recovered from US military bases. Now, eventually in this world, they do get rudimentary electricity and they do get steam power back. So maybe the Industrial Revolution, but they don't have chemicals, they don't have processing. The world is going to be a very shitty place for a couple of 100 years, if ever it returns to where it should be.
Yeah, society would never recover. I mean, that's the kind of the point of the last shot is, Ruth is not Ruth. I'm sorry. Now darn it, you have me doing Jane. Jane's raped.
Yeah.
And she gives birth to a very deformed fetus and is screaming as she looks at it in the dirt. And that's the last shot of the movie. And that's kind of the point that says there might still be survivors, but the future is even bleaker from here on out.
There was an essay that I listened to on this movie last night, and they described Threads as a movie that explores the extinction of hope. Yes. And I think about this because I find post-apocalyptic fiction, it's super popular these days. I mean, you look at The Walking Dead, The Last of Us, the Fallout video game franchise, The Terminator, and Mad Max. And, while there are heroes and villains here, very few of these franchises truly explore what it means to lose hope and what that does to humanity. And this is one of the few examples that I can think of in popular media where there is no heroic final shot. There is no underlying message of hope. This is the end of the line, guys. This is it. This is game over.
Mm-hmm.
And it's brutal. For
Yeah,
lack
it's
of a better
horrific.
description. Yeah.
It's horrific. It sticks in your head. That's why I said I didn't need to watch this again. Even if, and by the way, I'm not in the proper mind space to watch this again right now.
Yeah.
But I don't need to. Every single scene is scarred in me somehow. And people might think I'm exaggerating here. Oh, Aaron, you're just exaggerating. This can't be that bad. But like you said, you kind of had that same opinion.
Yeah, because I watched this movie and I made the mistake of watching this before I went to bed.
Oh, dude.
Yeah,
Dude.
that wasn't fun. I made sure to stay up and watch some happy stuff and play a couple video games before I went to sleep. So thanks, Batman. But yeah, it's one of those movies that I think people should seek out and see, but you need to understand what you're getting into, because when or if something terrible ever does happen, the only moment of potentially levity in this movie really happens right when the attack happens, and it happens when a guy is going to the bathroom. If Armageddon decides to come, it doesn't matter what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to happen. And I would think, as my own personal commentary on this, when I look at how the world has reacted to the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has reacted in terms of panic buying, denying the science, and even when you look at the political situations within our own different countries and even around the world, I wonder how people would react, how barbarous it would get, and how quickly it would get to that point. Mm-hmm. So movies like this, I think, do need to be shown. I think anybody who is a world leader should be watching this and taking notes, so to speak, and just understanding you do have a responsibility, not just to yourself, but to those that you serve. And let this be a grim reminder of what could happen. Be thankful this is fiction. So we're going to move on to our next movie. And this is one that Aaron suggested to me. And I didn't realize it was completely in Russian.
Yeah,
but
it
kind of made it kind of cooler. So the movie we're going to be talking about came out in 1979, and it's a movie called Stalker. And turns out there's a bunch of ancillary media around this. There are books, there's video games, and there's just a bunch of really cool crap that I didn't know about. Aaron can probably talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I can. And I will say that Darlene and I have specifically recorded an episode of Earth versus Soup about this movie because we both think it is one of the most important pieces of science fiction out of the Eastern Bloc, so to speak. It is incredibly influential.
When I was watching it, so to give people the setup to Stalker tells the story of a man known as the Stalker. A stalker is a person who is a guide who guides you to a place called the Zone. And he runs across these two individuals named the writer and the professor. They don't exchange names during the entire movie. He's like, you are the writer, you are the professor. I don't want to know anything else about you. And they're seeking this place out in the Zone known as the Room. The Room is something which is foretold to grant the person's innermost desire. So you might be thinking, well, that sounds kind of wondrous and kind of wonderful, but why is it so difficult to get to the Zone? We're never explicitly told, but this kind of foreshadows like Chernobyl and weird shit could be hiding out in the Zone. And the Stalker never explicitly says, oh, that's a mutant monster, but he says the Zone knows when you're fucking with it. And if you don't respect it, it will punish you. And there's even a point where the writer says, well, you know what? I don't like your way. I'm sick of looking for traps that aren't there. I'm just going to walk straight in and see what happens. And he just about gets to the door and something whispers his name. Like And he's like, the hell was that? So he walks back to the professor and the stalker, and he's like, which one of you guys stopped me? And they're like, well, I didn't do it. He's like, really? You didn't do that? And he's like, no. So it tells the story of how these three people are seeking out what they want. But the stalker, he doesn't want anything. He wants to help people. And you kind of find out as this movie goes on, that's not necessarily the case. This is a place where he can kind of control his own fates, but at the same time, it's almost like he's feeding on people's kind of misery because his home life sucks. But out here, he is God, and you depend on him. And there's a very interesting thought process that the writer talks about when he talks about what he wants out of the room and what the room might represent to him. And he says something along the lines of, just because you consciously want something doesn't mean that's what your heart truly wants. Your innermost desire may be completely different from what your conscious mind is. So you need to understand that. And he tells the cautionary tale of a former stalker who used to be known as Teacher, who became known as Porcupine. And I'm not going to spoil that because that's a wonderful revelation. And there's another guy, the professor, and he has his own agenda as well, because originally he says, well, I'm out here to potentially win a Nobel Prize and do something wonderful. I want to be recognized in my field. Not exactly. And it's a wonderful examination of what you're willing to do for what you want, but is that what you want? And I kind of reflected upon this because I find myself very introspective, and I tend to think of things in a philosophical and metaphysical kind of way. And when I think about the work that I do specifically with my charity work, with my advocacy work, I often say, I don't want to be remembered. I don't want to be recognized. I want my work to speak for itself. And the movie kind of touches upon ideas where what we leave behind. Like, are you a great leader? Do you do this? Do you do that? Do you contribute to society? Do you have a child? And I got to thinking, if I were at the room, what would come through? And because man is fallible. Everybody here makes a mistake. Everybody here has that dark side of their heart they don't want to admit to. And while watching Stalker, it really made me think, and I'm going to tie this into something else that happened to me this year personally. This year, for those of you that don't know, the Pope visited Canada, and the Pope was apologizing on behalf of the Catholic Church in regards to the residential schools that happened to the Indigenous children. Like, thousands dead, covered up. If you want to find out more, you can look that up. And I was quoted in a newspaper saying, I hope the Pope isn't securing his legacy. I hope he means what he says. I want his deeds to be written in stone and not sand. And while I was watching Stalker today, when they're just about to cross into the threshold of the room where their greatest desire could be granted, I kind of thought about other world leaders. I thought about people of influence and power. They say they want to change things. Is that the truth? And the movie really explores what hope means. Is hope gone? And what that means to you. And I'd be very curious to hear your brief thoughts on this, Aaron, but we'll let you and Darlene really let it kind of ruminate there.
Yeah, Darlene and I, when we recorded our episode, it should be coming out sometime soon. I know that well, it's actually episode 105, and I think 100 is being released tomorrow from when we're recording this, so it's going to be fairly soon. That we have a lot of thoughts about Stalker and the philosophy behind it, but I can say for people here that it doesn't matter what the room is or isn't. It doesn't matter if it actually is giving you something or if it's a real thing at all. One can make a determination whether it actually does have power or not based on what they see in this movie. But the point is that going to the room, the journey through the zone itself, is one of discovery for oneself.
Like, that's something that I'm really glad this movie didn't necessarily need monsters. It didn't need big set pieces. This movie was actually shot twice, I found out.
Yes, it is. We talk about that a lot. There's a lot of crazy things that happened with this film.
And it doesn't need set pieces. It needs atmosphere. And this movie has that in such droves. And the fact that it's shot in such a unique way. Like, the movie starts off in this weird sepia color. Then it goes black and white, and then it turns color.
Yes.
And you're like, what the hell is going on here? Like, I honestly wondered if the version I was watching was messed up.
No,
but I'm just watching it thinking, this is really, really, really interesting. And
you know why?
Okay.
Well, okay, Tarkovsky, the actual, like, the director of this, purposely did this. And it's because he wanted to make a distinction between the bleakness of the post-apocalyptic real world, quote unquote, and then the real world of the zone. That the zone is actually more real than the real world, that it is there to actually be a reflection of your true self. So that's why it's in color. It's actually real. And then the way it's shot, even in color, like as the camera moves around, understand that the camera is actually the point of view of the zone watching the characters.
Oh, interesting.
It's how it moves around the characters or pans. Like, there's this great shot where they're walking through the field of destroyed tanks. And the way the camera is moving, it feels like one of the characters is, you're following one of the points of view of one of the characters, and then you see all of the characters finally one by one come into the shot. And I think it's the writer that turns around and looks directly at the camera, like he senses something.
There's a real beauty to how this movie's shot. And there's also a line that really kind of sticks out to me, and I don't know whether it was meant to or not, but I think it's either Stalker or the writer says, have you noticed how the flowers don't have any scent? And he talks to us about how still everything is. And you hear, like, maybe wild dogs or maybe the ghosts of something that lives in the zone. And I don't know, it's something so eerie. And that's the thing about this, because when you think post-apocalyptic, you think of the Terminator, you think of, like, ruined buildings. And yes, that's here, but it's very secondary. I'd say the thing that really drives home that this is a post-apocalyptic world that's had something really bad happen to it, it's the way that the characters talk, and it's the dialogue. It's, I feel, one of the most effective movies when it comes to conveying post-apocalyptic almost entirely through dialogue and sound design. And it's something that I didn't expect to make me reflect upon things as much as it did. Now, it's something I want to watch again. It's something that you have to pay attention to 110%, because one, unless you speak fluent Russian, you're going to miss a lot. And it's just, watch the character's body language, listen to intonations. There's, like, a monologue given right at the end directly to the camera. There's a poem. There's a lot of things going on here that I hope when you watch this, you kind of think about your own life and how you reflect upon hope. Because as we just discussed with Threads is about the extinction of hope. I think Stalker means to give you perspective on hope. Be thankful
Mm-hmm.
for what you have and what you can create with your own two hands. You don't have to seek out a magical power, but you have to be willing to take agency in your own life to do something.
Yes, absolutely. And while you say yes, if you don't speak fluent Russian, you might get lost if you're not really paying attention. The fact is, there isn't a ton of dialogue in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
The dialogue is secondary to the atmosphere that Tarkovsky is trying to provide to you. I should also say that, like, there's this one line that the writer says, and it gives that, like, be thankful for what you have idea that you were just talking about. And he goes,
Mm-hmm.
the world is unutterably boring. There's no telepathy, no ghosts, no flying saucers. They can't exist. The world is ruled by cast iron laws. These laws are not broken. They just can't be broken. Don't hope for flying saucers. That would be too interesting.
Yep.
Don't hope for flying saucers. Which is interesting in context of where the film stems from as well. It's not just, it didn't like come whole cloth out of Tarkovsky's mind. This was based on a brilliant science fiction book called Roadside Picnic. And it actually has something to do with flying saucers, because the zone was actually one of many zones that appeared across the planet one day when aliens appeared. But humankind could not communicate with aliens. They couldn't talk to them. The aliens just didn't understand that we were talking to them, or we couldn't understand what the aliens were saying, or even if they recognized that we were alive. And after a little while, they left. And the zones are what was left behind. And the title Roadside Picnic is, what would a colony of ants think if a family stopped for a roadside picnic? And they would see the oil leaking from the car. Would they understand what the oil is, how it was made, what it's doing to them at a genetic level, or how it's influencing their world, the trash that was left behind? It's all of these unknowns. You have absolutely no conception of what really truly happened. And the zone, all this danger that's there, is just something that you don't understand. You have to be happy with what you have. And yes, you can get rich going into the zone and figuring out a tiny little portion of it. But you don't
often
really
comes
understand.
at a terrible cost.
It is at a terrible cost. And in specific with this movie, the Stalker's daughter is the cost for it. I don't know if you caught that right at the end of the movie.
I was like, is that because she's special?
Yes.
That's what okay.
But she's been changed because the Stalker has been changed by the zone.
Oh.
Now in Roadside Picnic, the daughter is a bit different than she is in the movie. It's a little more obvious in the book, but then again, you don't have a visual medium to tell part of the story, so that's it helps. In the book it's a little more explicit, but in the movie it isn't, and I think in the movie it's much better done because of that.
One thing I will say, this is one of the movies that I could absolutely say with 100% conviction, never remake this.
It's
timeless, and there are so few movies where I can say that. That's special. And like, I'm probably overselling it, but I think you can watch this on the Criterion channel. If not, there is a Criterion disc available of this. Please find a way to watch this. I think it will change a lot of your perspective. Will you get a little depressed? Yes, but
a little, yeah. It's more engaging. You're like drawn into the movie because of the long silences or the long periods of repeating noise that's almost hypnotic, or the very strange visuals of how Tarkovsky will slowly change the way he developed the film as he's moving the film through. So like scenes will change color grading.
I thought I noticed that.
It is subtle and brilliant absolutely brilliant. And you shouldn't remake this film because where he actually filmed it, it was toxic. It was toxic wasteland, and most of the crew died
Oh,
because,
Jesus.
including him. Like, there's a shot in this of like what looks to be like sand that's moving like waves on a lake.
Yeah.
It's a river covered in about an inch of toxic waste from a paper processing plant.
Oh my God.
And it's moving like ooze up and down. Do you remember that? Where
I
like
do. I
you
was
see
wondering
the
how the
wind,
hell they did that.
the wind blows across the top of it and there's like a dust devil coming off of it. And you're like, what in the hell is this? I'm not talking about the interior scene with like the sand dunes that are inside a building. That's a completely different thing. This was outside with like dust flying through the air. Yeah, it was awful. A lot of people got lung cancer after this from this movie. Like, this movie is important and it's visually incredible. Please listen to Darlene and my Earth versus Soup when it gets released on it, folks. If this comes out beforehand, I think it will come out before my Earth versus Soup. But we go on and on because this is a brilliant movie. I've seen this in a limited release theater on the big screen, and it's stunning. And I've seen this at home on the Criterion Collection. Both are great. Obviously, seeing it on the big screen is fantastic. One other like little bit of trivia: if you've seen the movie Atomic Blonde, at one point in the movie Atomic Blonde, they actually have Stalker happening on the big screen. They're showing Stalker on the big screen.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
You see scenes from Stalker going on. But anyway, that's a weird bit of trivia.
Also, folks, if you want to experience this a little bit, there are video games kind of sort of based on this. There is the Stalker video game franchise and Metro Exodus. Metro Exodus, I think both of those games are available via PlayStation Plus, and I think they may also be on Xbox Game Pass. Regardless, they are fantastic games. They are hard games, but they are worth it. So be sure to check those out.
We should make clear, though, that the Metro series is based on a book series called Metro, written by Dmitry Glukhovsky. It isn't actually Stalker. It just kind of feels like it in some ways, because I think Glukhovsky took inspiration from it.
I think they recreate some locations in Metro from Stalker.
No, they shouldn't. They shouldn't, because Metro takes place in Moscow, and the Stalker video games take place in the Chernobyl exclusion zone.
Okay, so I may have misread the wiki, folks. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I don't mean to say you're wrong, but I'm just making sure people have the proper information.
Yeah. So our last movie we're going to talk about came out in 1977, was it, Aaron? For Logan's Run?
76.
76. So Logan's Run, it's a very famous movie. You may have heard people say carousel. renewal. And I'd always wondered what the hell that meant. And I watched it tonight, and I was watching this, and I'm watching the lead character, Logan number 5, and I'm hearing his voice. I'm looking at his face. I'm like, who the fuck are you? And I decided to pull up IMDb. It's Basil Exposition from the Austin Powers movies. Which kind of stole a little bit of his thunder, but I realized just how much range this guy has. So the story of Logan's Run tells there's this utopian society in the 23rd century, and they live under these big domed cities, and it's a paradise. Everything is wonderful. Everything is cool. Everything's great. However, there's a big catch. So birth is strictly controlled in these places. So when you turn 30, you go to carousel. Basically, long story short, game over, you're dead. You go through a process called renewal, but nobody knows what that means. Basically, you get chucked. And it follows the story of Francis and Logan. They are what's known as Sandmen, and they are basically the elite cops of this underground society, where if they try and eliminate people who are known as runners, when they have this thing on their left hand that flashes red when you reach 30 or you're super close to it, it starts flashing, and that means it's time to go to carousel, it's time to die. And inevitably, people run. But it turns out there's this rumor of a place called Sanctuary where people live in happiness and harmony, and it's beyond the walls. It's in the outside that nobody has seen in hundreds of years. And there's something very akin to Skynet or Friend Computer from the Paranoia role-playing game that tasks Logan with find Sanctuary. I'm going to make you look like you're a runner and you're going to infiltrate this group. And it follows Logan trying to infiltrate this group, but he kind of realizes something isn't right here. And eventually there's like a robot, and he gets outside and he sees the sun for the first time. And he goes to the ruins of Washington, D.C., which is very reminiscent of The Last of Us or The Division 2, where it's all overgrown with like weeds, the Senate chamber's all overgrown, and then like, who the hell is this guy? And it's a picture of Abraham Lincoln. And you get a different type of post-apocalyptic world because we don't know what's caused this thing, presumably ecological disaster, population, or it even could be the intervention of artificial intelligence enslaving humanity, and we've just gotten used to it. This is a movie that ended on a surprising amount of hope for me, because I was always led to believe that Logan's Run was yet another one of these super depressing post-apocalyptic movies, but I was very pleasantly surprised. And randomly, Farrah Fawcett, I was like, I know you, when she's like, dark hair. I'm thinking, I know that voice. And I just, again, she's a tremendously beautiful woman. But what I got here, it was something so different. And I love the fact how they use miniatures. It looks a little goofy at times, but it's practical. Yeah, it's practical. It works. And the costumes, some of them are really elaborate. Some of them are really simple. I mean, basically, to be a Sandman, you could walk down the Target, get the right kind of sweater, and you're probably good. And it's just, it was neat, although I love the goofy, almost 1950s design of the robot box. Because he has like these, like, I don't know, air conditioning arms. And it feels like a 1950s movie made with 1970s and even beyond futurism built into it. And I just thought it was incredibly clever. And I actually have a friend on my Facebook. His name's Brandon. And it turns out for years, whenever anybody turned 30, he would give people a copy of Logan's Run.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's just a great gag. So what are some of your thoughts on Logan's Run, Aaron?
I like it because while it is post-apocalyptic and it has some kind of bleak moments, the fact is like that people are being killed when they turn 30 and they don't really need to die, that all of these deaths are kind of meaningless, that people are being killed and used for meat. Like, this is kind of an awful thing too, right? Even with all of this, there is hope. Out of all of these, it isn't like the death of hope like in Threads, or hope isn't really a thing in Stalker. It's more of like, be happy with what you have. In this, it ends on hope that, the world's ended, but that's okay because it's better than the situation in your bubble dome.
Yeah, like I like how it explores the idea of maybe we can start again, because they have such a young population. They've never seen anybody over the age of 30, so much so that they deny it. And when they meet the old man, who's a cat person, I love this.
And he's living in the Senate chamber of the U.S. Capitol. Yeah.
And he talks about his parents and how he was raised. And when this young woman, who probably can't be any older than like a teenager, reaches out and touches the aged lines in his face and they both smile, you maybe get the idea maybe people are more willing to accept maybe there is something better out there. And the world, despite it being overgrown and changed by whatever happened, it's green again. The sun is bright. It's orange. It's beautiful. There's fresh water. They're swimming naked when they escape the ice caves. And they're kind of breathing their first breath of free air. And that's why I'm kind of glad we're ending this episode on this note, because post-apocalyptic fiction, I've noticed in the last couple of years, tends to be utterly brutal, defeatist. It ends in a really dark place. Like, one of the best examples of this, I think we could probably say, is The Walking Dead. And The Walking Dead is, long story short, we are horrible to each other. Are we worse than the walkers that want to eat our flesh?
And there's no hope because everyone's going to die and turn into a zombie anyway.
Yeah. Or you look at a video game like The Last of Us Part 2, which, sorry guys, it's been a couple years, I'm going to spoil it. When Ellie loses her family and she's left by herself, you did this to yourself. You had a perfect life and all you had to do was let go of revenge, and you would have been fine. You could have you could have done whatever you wanted. And when you look at Logan's Run, they have a choice to shape their future. And I think stuff like Fallout, it presents kind of a goofier version of the apocalypse, where there's like robots, bottle caps. There's even occasionally a vending machine that'll have perfectly preserved pie.
Sure.
And you know what? That's fine. In fact, as of today's recording, some official set photos were leaked from the Amazon Fallout TV series, and holy shit, does it look good.
See, I love Fallout. I absolutely adore Fallout.
Yeah, like I love Fallout 4. That is my jam.
But I will say, like, for post-apocalyptic stuff that's incredibly bleak, i.e. Threads, normally I despise it. I don't think there's any point, because it's kind of like, as a viewer, you're just kind of wallowing in muck, right? You're just enjoying the feeling of feeling awful. Now, Threads, there's a point to it, though. They're trying to scare you out of your
comfort zone.
Yeah, they're trying to make you say, crap, I didn't think about this. Whereas here we're living in the 2020s. Things suck anyway. It's not like it's a post-apocalypse, but things aren't great. We don't need to be reminded and shocked out of it, right? I don't need to be reminded that people will deny reality and willfully ignore the world ending. I mean, I do climate change research. I damn well know that is a thing. So the hopelessness of these like terribly bleak post-apocalyptic things, I don't like. I do not like them. Threads is the rare exception because
it's educational.
It's educational, and I only need to have watched it once.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I don't know whether I'm ever going to go back to it, but I do like the idea that it made me look at the world from a different perspective, because like I said, a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction, you want to be the hero, and very few of these movies really paint the apocalypse as it truly would. But fiction allows us to explore the strange, the wonderful, the fantastic. What it doesn't always do, unfortunately, is allow us to think about the what ifs of reality. Because I remember there's a very famous meme where it's like a picture of somebody lying awake at night, and it goes something along the lines of, allow me to picture myself in 1,000 situations that may never happen. Whereas you look at a movie like Threads, that's unfortunately not an unrealistic possibility, even day to day.
Yeah.
And it's something that I hope people consider watching. But I will say this, as Aaron did, consider watching and talking with somebody afterwards. There is no shame. And we're not trying to freak you out. We're just trying to prepare you for it, because it does a more effective job than I think the movie The Day After. The Day After was almost a little hokey with the rape gangs, but maybe that's a thing. Who knows? And a movie like Stalker, I hope that makes you stop and think about what are some of the truly beautiful things in your life that you have. And if you want something more, are you willing to take the agency to go and get it? There is no magic wish. There is no infinity stones. You can snap your fingers and it just happens. You're going to have to go out there and make it happen. And with Logan's run, I want to believe that even if something terrible happens, I have this naive belief, but it carries me through every single day, that humanity can accomplish something wonderful. We are capable of so much more when we want to be.
Yes.
And I think that that's a good way to close out the show. So the next time on Future Imperfect, it's again going to be me and Aaron. We're probably going to be doing this for a couple more shows until Alex comes back. We're going to be talking about the space program, which is something me and Aaron have a huge interest in. Aaron's worked with this field before. I have just been a casual observer on the sidelines. And we're going to talk about some of the cool things that have happened in space. I know one of the things that I want to talk about, and I don't think a lot of people know about, is, did you know, folks, we have landed probes on Venus. We have audio. We have pictures. We are sending probes there very, very soon. I think 2029 is the next mission. But
we can hope.
Yeah. Like, there is cool stuff happening, and we're gonna be able to get pictures. We may even have video briefly from the surface of Venus.
Yeah, Venus is not a very hospitable place. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And going to a place like Venus allows us to look at what happened to Earth in the very, very, very far past before something happened. And Aaron, I don't know what program you're going to talk about, but we're just going to celebrate all things that extend our reach to the stars, that don't involve transporters and phasers and the Borg. So we are going to have a fantastic time. I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to be a fun research-based show, but just talking about all things wonderful. So if you want to do yourself a bit of a favor, just go up on YouTube, go look up stuff on the James Webb Space Telescope, go look up any of the number of different science channels that will tell you about things. Learn something about the universe, because you know what? I firmly believe the future history of humanity, if we make it that far, and I really think we are going to, is written in the stars, and we're going to see something amazing happen in our lifetimes. So Aaron, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I love working with you. It's always a pleasure.
Not a problem. I love being here and talking movies and talking whatever. It gives me a chance to get all this information that's inside my head out.
So yes, guys, that's going to do it for us here on Future Imperfect. So until next time, make sure you are reporting to your duty shift when you are assigned. Make sure you're always checking the transport buffer. So for Future Imperfect, we have been...
I'm Aaron Pollyea.
I've been Lieutenant Commander Mike the Birdman, saying, and until next time, folks, live long and prosper.
It is now the year 2077. We stand on the brink of total war. And I am afraid. For myself. For my wife. For my infant son. Because if my time in the army taught me one thing, It's that war never changes.
Computer, this is Captain James Kirk of the USS Enterprise. Destruct sequence 1, code 1, 1A.
Computer, initiate the self-destruct sequence. Authorization Janeway Pi 110.
Computer, this is Captain Benjamin Sisko. Initiate auto-destruct sequence. Authorization Cisco Alpha 1 Alpha.
Begin auto-destruct sequence. Authorization Picard 47 Alpha Tango.
Self-destruct in 15 minutes. There will be no further audio warning.
My lord, the ship appears to be deserted.
How can that be? They're hiding.
Yes, sir. But the bridge seems to be run by computer. It is the only thing speaking.
Speaking? Let me hear.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5,